Right now, there are 76 million baby boomers sitting on $18 trillion in real estate equity. And in the next 3 years, something catastrophic is about to happen. I'm not talking about a normal market correction. I'm not talking about a gentle cooling period. I'm talking about the largest forced liquidation of residential real estate in American history. Picture this. Your neighbor, 72 years old, living in a 4-bedroom colonial she's owned for 30 years. Her husband died last year. She's got arthritis, can't do the stairs anymore, and her property taxes just went up again. Her kids live in different states. She needs to sell. She has to sell. Now multiply that scenario by 30 million homes. That's what's coming. That's the silver tsunami. And it's not a gentle wave lapping at the shore. It's a tsunami that's going to reshape the entire American economy. This isn't just about boomers downsizing or retiring. This is about your ability to build wealth in the next decade. Whether you're trying to buy your first home, whether you already own property, whether you're investing in real estate, or whether you have aging parents who keep saying they'll sell eventually, what's about to happen will fundamentally alter your financial future. And here's what keeps me up at night. Nobody in government, nobody in real estate, and almost nobody in finance is preparing for this. The data is right there. The demographic cliff is visible. But everyone's pretending it's not happening. We're talking about 30+ million homes potentially flooding the market between now and 2032. Think about that number. 30 million homes. To put it in perspective, we only build about 1.4 million new homes per year in this country. This isn't supply gradually increasing. This is a dam breaking. And on the other side of that dam, you've got Millennials and Gen Z who can't afford homes right now today in this market. So what happens when supply explodes? What happens when all that inventory hits and there's nobody with the financial capacity to absorb it? The really scary part, the part that nobody's talking about, is the cascade effect. When housing prices collapse in certain markets, and they will collapse, it doesn't just hurt homeowners. It devastates local tax bases, it crushes regional banks, it wipes out retirement savings, it triggers a wave of defaults on home equity lines of credit. We're talking about $5 trillion in housing equity potentially evaporating. And that money was supposed to fund retirements, pay for healthcare, leave inheritances. When that wealth disappears, the economic consequences ripple through everything. I've spent months analyzing demographic data, housing inventory trends, regional market dynamics, and economic projections. I've looked at mortality tables, healthcare cost projections, and generational wealth transfer patterns, and every single data point confirms the same thing. We are heading toward a collision between an aging generation that must sell and a younger generation that cannot buy. The math doesn't work, the timeline is compressed, and the geographic concentration of risk is extreme. Here's what we're going to cover. First, the exact timeline. When does this start? When does it peak? Which markets get hit first? Second, the hidden economic domino effect. How does this trigger problems in banking, in municipal finance, in retail, and healthcare? Third, and this is crucial, the massive geographic variation. Some markets are going to get absolutely destroyed, others might barely feel it. You need to know which is which. And finally, the opportunities. Because here's the thing, this could be the greatest wealth transfer opportunity in modern history if you position yourself correctly. Or it could be an absolute disaster if you're on the wrong side of it. If you own property, if you're planning to buy property, if you have aging parents who own property, if you work in real estate or construction or banking or anything connected to housing, you need to understand what's coming. This isn't fear-mongering. This is math. This is demographics. This is inevitable. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers don't lie. 76 million baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. Right now, in 2024, they range in age from 60 to 78 years old. And here's the critical stat. Boomers have a home ownership rate of 78.8%. Compare that to the national average of 65%. They own homes at a dramatically higher rate than any other generation. In fact, boomers own 42% of all owner-occupied homes in America. 42%. They control nearly half of all residential real estate in this country. Now look at the age distribution. This is where it gets interesting. The boomer generation isn't evenly distributed across those birth years. There was a massive spike in births right after World War II, from 1946 to 1955. That's the bulk of the generation, that's where the concentration is. And that cohort is now between 69 and 78 years old. They're hitting the critical transition points right now. Here's what the data tells us about aging and housing. Between age 70 and 75, health issues start forcing downsizing conversations. Maybe it's mobility problems. Maybe it's the burden of maintenance. Maybe it's the first serious health scare. But this is when people start seriously considering selling. Between 75 and 80, the majority actually do downsize or move to assisted living. The house becomes too much. The stairs are dangerous. The yard is overwhelming. And after age 80, estate sales and inheritance transfers spike dramatically. Life expectancy is around 78 to 80 years. So this is when mortality becomes a major factor in housing turnover. Now here's why 2028 is the inflection point. In 2028, the youngest boomers turn 64. The oldest turn 82. The entire generation is now in or approaching the downsizing years. But more importantly, that huge cohort born between 46 and 55, they're all between 73 and 82. They're right in the peak selling window. This is when the dam breaks. This is when millions of homes hit the market simultaneously. Think about your own neighborhood. Think about how many houses are owned by people in their 70s. Think about how many of those people are still living in the same house they raised their kids in. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, big yard, 2-car garage, and now it's just 1 or 2 elderly people rattling around in all that space. They know they should sell. Their kids are telling them to sell. But they're emotionally attached. They're overwhelmed by the process. They're hoping they can just stay forever. But eventually, something forces the decision. Healthcare costs are the biggest driver. The average cost of long-term care is over $300,000. Medicare doesn't cover most of it. If you need assisted living or a nursing home, you're paying $5,000 to $10,000 a month out of pocket. Where does that money come from? For most boomers, it comes from selling the house. They have no choice. The equity in their home is their healthcare fund. Then there's the maintenance burden. Try maintaining a 3,000 square foot home at 75. Try mowing the lawn, cleaning the gutters, shoveling snow, fixing the water heater when it breaks at midnight. It's not sustainable. And hiring people to do all that maintenance eats into fixed retirement income. Eventually, it becomes cheaper and easier to just sell and move somewhere smaller. The widow effect is huge too. When one spouse dies, the survivor often can't or won't stay in the house. It's too big, too expensive, too full of memories. Within a year or two of losing a spouse, the surviving partner usually sells. And with boomers now in their 70s and 80s, mortality is accelerating. Every year, more widows and widowers are making the decision to sell. Geographic isolation is another factor nobody talks about. The kids moved away for jobs. They're in different cities, different states. Mom and dad are aging in a house with no support system nearby. No family to help with emergencies. No one to drive them to doctor appointments. Eventually, they have to move closer to the kids or into a facility. Either way, the house gets sold, and property taxes are crushing people on fixed incomes. In many suburban areas, property taxes have doubled or tripled over the past 20 years. Social Security and pension income haven't kept pace. People are paying $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year in property taxes on homes they own outright. It's unsustainable. They're being taxed out of their own homes. This isn't about boomers wanting to cash out and move to Florida for fun. This is about necessity. This is about survival. They're not selling because they want to. They're selling because they have to. And that distinction matters, because it means this wave of inventory is coming whether the market is ready for it or not. So who's supposed to buy these homes? That's the question nobody wants to ask out loud, because the answer is terrifying. We're told there's this massive millennial generation, 72 million strong, finally entering their prime home buying years. The narrative goes like this: boomers sell, millennials buy, everything balances out, market stays healthy. Except that's a fantasy. That's not what's going to happen, and the data proves it. Let's start with the most basic problem. Millennials are broke. I don't mean that flippantly. I mean statistically, measurably, historically broke, compared to previous generations at the same age. The home ownership rate for millennials right now sits at 51%. That's catastrophically low. By comparison, boomers at the same age had home ownership rates above 60%. Gen X was at 55%. We're watching an entire generation locked out of the housing market at the exact moment when we need them to absorb the largest inventory surge in American history. Why are they broke? Student debt: $1.7 trillion in outstanding student loans. The average millennial borrower is carrying $30,000 to $40,000 in student debt. Some are carrying six figures. You cannot save for a down payment when you're sending $800 a month to Navin or Nellie Mae. It's mathematically impossible. The money that should be going into a savings account for a house is going to pay for a degree that was supposed to make them wealthy enough to buy a house. The irony is crushing, but it gets worse. Wage stagnation. Real wages adjusted for inflation have barely moved for millennials compared to what boomers earned at the same age. The median millennial household income is around $69,000. That sounds decent until you compare it to housing costs. The traditional ratio, the one that banks and financial advisors have used for decades, says your home should cost roughly 3 times your annual income. So a household making $69,000 should be looking at homes around $200,000. The median home price in America right now is $420,000. That's 6 times income. Double what it should be. The math doesn't work. It's not even close. And then there are mortgage rates. Boomers refinanced into 3% mortgages during the pandemic. Many of them have rates even lower than that from previous decades. Millennials are looking at 7%, sometimes higher, depending on credit and down payment. Let's run the actual numbers on a $420,000 home. With 20% down, that's $84,000 up front. Most millennials don't have $84,000. The median savings for a millennial household is around $15,000. So they're going to put down less, maybe 5 or 10%, which means they're paying PMI, private mortgage insurance, on top of everything else. Their monthly payment on that median-priced home with a smaller down payment in current rates is going to be around $3,200. Add in property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and you're easily over $4,000 a month. On a $69,000 income, that's 55% of take-home pay going to housing. That's not sustainable. That's financial suicide. Here's a real scenario. A 32-year-old couple, both have decent jobs, combined income of $80,000. They've been saving for 3 years and have $20,000 in the bank for a down payment. They also have $80,000 in combined student loans. They're paying $900 a month on those loans. They have car payments, insurance, groceries, all the normal expenses of life. They find a house they like for $450,000 in a suburb 40 minutes from where they work. With their down payment, their mortgage payment is $3,500 a month. Add everything else and they're spending 60% of their income on housing and debt. They can't do it. They get denied. Or worse, they get approved, buy the house, and spend the next 10 years one emergency away from foreclosure. This isn't an edge case. This is millions of millennials right now. But let's say we solve the affordability problem somehow. Let's say wages magically increase or prices come down. There's still another massive problem: geographic mismatch. Boomers don't own homes where millennials want to live. This is huge and almost nobody is talking about it. Boomers own in suburbs. They own in exurbs. They own in retirement communities in Florida and Arizona. They own in rural areas. They bought big homes with big yards in places that made sense in 1985. 4-bedroom colonials on half-acre lots in subdivisions 30 miles outside of major cities. That's where boomer wealth is concentrated. Millennials don't want that. Study after study shows millennials prioritize walkability, access to urban amenities, proximity to jobs and culture. They want to live in cities or close in suburbs with good transit. They don't want to mow lawns. They don't want to drive an hour each way to work. The lifestyle preferences are completely different. So you've got millions of homes in places millennials don't want to be, and a shortage of housing in places where they do want to be. The market can't correct for that quickly. You can't just pick up a house in suburban Atlanta and move it to Brooklyn. And then there's the McMansion problem. Boomers bought big. The average new home size in America peaked in the 2000s at around 2,600 square feet. Many boomer homes are 3,000, 4,000, even 5,000 square feet. These are massive houses. Millennials are having fewer kids. They're having kids later. Many aren't having kids at all. A childless millennial couple or a family with one kid doesn't need 5 bedrooms and 3 living rooms. They don't want to heat and cool that much space. They don't want to furnish it. They don't want to clean it. The utility bills alone on these houses are crushing. We're talking $300, $400, $500 a month just to keep the lights on and the AC running. So now imagine you're a millennial couple. You've somehow scraped together a down payment. You're looking at homes. You find a 4,000 square foot house in a suburb 40 miles out. It's in a neighborhood full of retirees. The schools are declining because there are no young families. There's no walkable downtown, no restaurants or bars nearby. You'd need 2 cars minimum. The house needs updates because it hasn't been touched since 2005, and it's still $450,000. Are you buying that? No, you're not. Nobody is. That house is gonna sit. And there are millions of them. Let me show you what this looks like on a map. If you look at a heat map of where boomers own homes versus where millennial job growth is happening, the overlap is minimal. Boomers are concentrated in suburban rings, retirement destinations, and rural areas. Millennial job growth is in urban cores, tech hubs, and university towns. Austin, Denver, Seattle, parts of the Bay Area, Nashville, these places have demand. But suburban New Jersey, exurban Phoenix, rural Pennsylvania, there's no buyer base. The jobs aren't there, the lifestyle isn't there, the demand isn't there. This is how you get ghost suburbs. I'm not being hyperbolic. There are entire subdivisions that could become 21st century ghost towns. Developments built in the 90s and 2000s for boomer families that are now aging out with no younger generation to replace them. You'll have streets where half the houses are empty or on the market for years. Property values will collapse. Municipal services will decline because the tax base is eroding. It becomes a death spiral, and once it starts, it's very hard to reverse. Florida is the canary in the coal mine. The Villages, the largest retirement community in America, has over 100,000 residents, almost all boomers. What happens in 10 years when those residents need to move to assisted living or pass away? Who's buying those homes? Millennials aren't retiring to the Villages. They're not even visiting the Villages. You're going to have tens of thousands of homes in a community built for a demographic that's disappearing. The same pattern is playing out in retirement communities across Florida, Arizona, the Carolinas. These places were built on the assumption of endless waves of retirees with money. That assumption is breaking. And here's the kicker. Climate change is making some of these areas even less desirable. Florida is dealing with insurance crises, hurricane risks, flooding. Arizona is facing water shortages and extreme heat. Coastal areas everywhere are looking at rising seas and more severe storms. Millennials are factoring this into their decisions. They're not buying in high-risk climate zones. They're not buying in places where insurance is skyrocketing or where water might not be available in 20 years. This compounds the geographic mismatch. The places where boomers own are increasingly the places nobody wants to be. So let's bring this back to the core question. Who's buying 30 million homes? The answer is nobody. Not at current prices, not in current locations. The market is going to have to adjust, and adjust violently. Prices will have to come down, way down. We're not talking about a 5 or 10% correction. In the most affected markets, we're talking 25, 30, 40% declines, maybe more in specific communities. A $600,000 home in a boomer-heavy suburb could be worth $400,000 by 2030. A home in a declining exurban area could lose half its value. And this isn't speculation. This is supply and demand. When you flood a market with inventory and there aren't enough buyers, prices collapse. It's Econ 101. The only question is how fast and how far. The optimistic scenario is a slow bleed over 10 years. Prices drift down, some markets stabilize, others don't. The pessimistic scenario is a rapid crash starting around 2028 when the wave really hits. Panic selling, foreclosures, banks tightening credit, a full-blown housing recession. And remember, we're potentially heading into this with an economy already weakened by other factors. Inflation, debt levels, geopolitical instability. The housing crash doesn't happen in a vacuum. Here's what keeps me up at night. The velocity problem. It's not just the volume of homes, it's the timing. If these homes came on the market gradually over 20 years, the market could absorb them. But they're not. They're coming in a concentrated window between 2028 and 2035. That's when the bulk of boomers hit the critical age ranges. That's when health crises force sales. That's when the widow effect kicks in at scale. That's when estates get settled and heirs who don't want the property dump it. You're going to see inventory spike from 3 or 4 months to 12, maybe 18 months in some markets. That's a disaster. Sellers will panic. They'll undercut each other. Prices will free fall. And the people who get hurt the worst are the boomers themselves. The ones who were counting on their home equity to fund retirement. They're going to sell into a collapsing market and get a fraction of what they thought their home was worth. Their entire retirement plan, the thing they spent 40 years building, loses 30 or 40% of its value right when they need it most. That's a tragedy on a personal level and an economic catastrophe on a national level. Because when boomers can't fund their retirement, they become dependent on systems that are already strained. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the costs get pushed onto society. This is the buyer crisis. Not enough buyers. Wrong locations, wrong home types, wrong prices, and no easy fix. You can't manufacture millions of qualified buyers overnight. You can't move homes to where demand exists. You can't change demographic trends or lifestyle preferences. The collision is coming, and the people telling you the market will be fine are either lying or they haven't done the math.